Vega. Thank you everybody for coming out this evening. It's wonderful to have a nice intimate crowd, and hopefully that will also facilitate nice free flow conversation. I'll just set the scene for a second, and that is really that, so we work for African Parks. It's a conservation organization, and why it's important is people need nature to survive. And nowhere is this more relevant than in the wild and rural spaces, not only in Africa, but also in Asia and other parts of the world. As Nadia mentioned, my name is Vega Hall-Martin. I'm the Director for African Parks in Asia. African Parks is an organization that specializes in protected area management. And no other organization enjoys the level of success or operates at the scale that African Parks does. The organization was founded in 2000 and very much born out of a sense of frustration. The founders looked at what was going on across the continent of Africa and realized that they needed to do something different, otherwise the biodiversity would be lost for generations. And so they pioneered a public-private partnership approach to conservation or protected area management. And what that means is that we work in partnership with governments and local communities to manage these areas on their behalf. Today, African Parks manages 22 parks across 12 different countries, spanning an area of over 20 million hectares. And for context on size, that's larger than the country of France. We estimate that around 2.5 million people live in and around the parks that we manage. And this will be also the focus of this evening's conversation, is really looking at the community work that we do around, specifically in Majete, and I'll introduce John in a second, but this is relevant to all the parks that we manage. Our aim is to manage 30 parks by 2030. Protecting biodiversity is essential to our survival. However, the communities that live around these protected areas bear the cost of protecting nature, and that takes the form of human-wildlife conflicts, for example. African Parks aims to minimize that impact, whilst at the same time increasing benefits to communities through effective park management. And at this point, I'd like to introduce my colleague, John Adendorff. John is the park manager for Majete Wildlife Reserve in Malawi. He's a pilot and has over 30 years of conservation experience in South Africa and in Malawi. And if you're not familiar with the country of Malawi, it's a small landlocked country, more or less in the middle of Africa, also known as the warm heart of Africa, and a country that, for the friendliness of its people, and a country that I love to visit. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't been, please pay Malawi a visit. Majete is the first park in the African Parks portfolio. John, I wonder if you can share a little bit with the audience what we found, the state of the park and the situation in the community when African Parks first arrived in 2003.
Very good, thanks Steve. So Majete is this piece of land, and I'll take you back in a bit of history because, and maybe just mention the two ladies here, the founding member. Their father was a man called Dr. Anthony Wildlife, and an absolute visionary, and he's one of the founding members. And he pretty much came up with this novel idea that they would support African countries and try and protect these areas that were in desperate need of conservation. And he had, as a youngster, he had worked in Malawi and built up a connection in Malawi. So one of the first countries they naturally would approach would be Malawi. So in 2000 they sat around a campfire and figured out this crazy idea that they're going to help African countries, and it would have been a very difficult sell. You know, it's politicians that you're dealing with, but luckily there was an individual in Malawi who had the foresight to bring African Parks on board and give us a chance. Our first option was a reserve called Lwande National Park, and it's a premier destination in Malawi, but they weren't keen on that, and they said, you can go for this godforsaken little place called Majete, and it was a reserve. It's not even, so if you know the proclamations, a national park carries a far higher status than a reserve does. And back in the day, in 2003, Majete was finished. It was honestly, the birds had stopped calling, there was no wildlife left, everything had gone extinct. on the landscape at a local scale. It is a place that historically would have had the Big Five. You all know, have heard of the Big Five. It was in a desperate state. Community was starting to enter the reserve as well. There was no management, proper management. The resources were being depleted. Wood was being chopped out of the reserve. And AP came along in 2003 and put this model in place, and we'll explain a bit later, but it's now a premier destination on the African landscape. We get people from all over the world coming to us to look at the model and see how it's possible. So we've coined this slogan of resilience and hope, and it's definitely that. It's where there's a will, there's a means to achieve, and we've done that as African Parks, and it's a flagship park in the African Parks portfolio. We often use it as an example that anything is possible if you put the right people and the right minds to it. You can achieve a lot.
Thanks, John. And you talked a little bit about the park, how desolate it was. There was nothing left. Would you say that that is a story that repeats itself across Africa when it comes to Africa's protected areas?
So the problem with Africa, there's no finance for national parks. So first world countries, there's often subsidies that are in place, and government subsidizes the management of parks. In Africa, it's not the case. You're on your own, and you've got to find a means to actually make it work. So conservation generally is failing across the landscape. We've got these grandeur images, and we all get influenced by social media of these thriving populations of wildlife and teeming plains, and in the Serengeti seeing these huge herds. It's actually not the case. We're fighting for our lives to protect these areas. And it's the same, it repeats itself all over the African continent. There's just not enough to go around to protect these areas, and it's very much reliant on NGOs to come on board and donors to come and support these protected areas and put models in place that ultimately would lead to some sustainability. In the Majete case, we're getting there now. We're still a long way to go, but we hope within the next 20 years we could be sustainable and not reliant on any donor funding.
Bringing it back to the communities, we need to build strong community support if biodiversity conservation is going to be successful, because the audience might not be aware, but if you look at expected growth in human population across the globe, if you look at North and South America, Asia, Europe, there are very small increases or decreases expected between now and the year 2100. Population growth is expected to triple in Africa between now and 2100. So there's a huge increase in population. So competing for land, so nature, protecting land versus the need for space for agriculture. So the need, the balancing the needs between community and conservation is really essential. What structures are put in place? So bringing back to the point that we need strong community support to make conservation a success, what structures are put in place around Majete specifically, and also other parks, to make sure that there is clear communication channels between the park and the communities, to make sure that we understand the needs and the concerns of the communities that live around these areas?
So most of our countries have democracies in place, but we've got to go back to the old traditional authorities that manage these landscapes. And in a place where we are, in most countries in Africa, you have a traditional authority, and we call them the local TAs, traditional authority. Around Majete there would be 6 of them, and you can actually, if you want to associate it to a Western style of living, that's your king and queen living in that area, and then you've got your village, senior village headman, you've got your village headman, and you've got to respect that. You've absolutely got to respect that. You've got to do away with the political sphere. You've got to work with your government partners as well. But once you respect that and you get the communities on board, so let's just take it back to Majete in the early days. It would have been a lot of conflict because there were certain rights that people believed over time that they'd gained because there was no policing in the reserve, and you had to take them back. So there was a little bit of conflict initially, but what we do and do very effectively is involve the communities all around. So we've got various structures that we use, and on a quarterly basis get together in boardrooms and discuss solutions and how we can make the parks better, how they can co-opt and find ways to make the park beneficial to the community. I can tell you, in most of the countries that we operate in, incredibly poor, and I think sometimes Westerners find it very difficult to associate how poor these people are. It's maybe one meal a day if you're lucky. Maybe you're lucky to survive today. Tomorrow is just a luxury. We're talking about kids, and going back to the population dynamics. In Malawi, 46% of the population is under the age of 15. And you can see the problems that are going to arise from that in its own right. So we create development structures as well. So all our employment at the moment in Majete, and I'll just talk about Majete, but we can duplicate, it's well over 2,000 staff members in African Parks. What is the number? It's
5,500.
5,000, yeah. So we employ a lot of people, but we go out of our way. 97% of those people are employed from the surrounding areas around our parks. There's very few of us that are brought in for mentorship and to get structures right, but we also believe over time we'll hand it over to the communities. But within those structures, we make sure we're taking care of the clinical needs, the hospital side of things, the education side of things. In Majete, we provide 115 bursaries. The 20-year celebration was last year, and it was incredibly rewarding to see people stand up and say, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, and it's all because of the scholarships that we provided. So we realize that it's critically important to keep the communities involved in the management of these reserves. Without doing that, you would be fighting fire with fire, and inevitably you always lose that battle. It's critical to really keep the communities engaged and let them get emotional ownership of the reserve. A big challenge for us going forward would be to maintain the emotional ownership of a reserve with the growing population. But with upskilling the population as well, we will see huge benefits within the community. People can aspire for careers rather than have to go and work the lands and do what they did historically.
John, what happens when conflict arises between the park and the communities? How do you go about resolving that?
I wish I could tell the whole story of Majete.
Please do.
I feel as though we don't be jumping in and
why don't you?
But it's such an incredible story, and I'll try and compact it into 4 hours. But but it started from very humble beginnings, and it is. You've got all these tiers that play a very important, pivotal role in making a success of a reserve. And people are definitely a big part of that. But Majete has come from this little reserve and a community that was up in arms and didn't like the idea to these days we are the best thing that's ever happened in the area. And if anybody does try and challenge us from a political front, we know the community's got our backs. They will support us tooth and nail. And I challenge a lot or any person visiting us to go into a community and find any negative sentiments towards us. But it's this incredible story of revival. It's a place that the birds weren't chirping. There was no wildlife, there was no spoor on the ground. I'm an African to the core, I'm third generation, grown up in the bush. This is foreign to me, it's like I'm way out of my comfort zone. But it's a place that, and I guess we'll get gooseflesh talking about it. It's the incredible revival, and it's happened over a very short period of time. I'll give you an example. We introduced just under 3,000 head of animals. Today we've got over 13,000 head of animals. We introduced 200 buffalo. We've got 2,500 buffalo. We We brought in, I think it was 96 elephant, and today we've got 411 elephants. And we brought in 7 rhino, and we've got 33 rhinos. And we've got all those species, those that everybody wants to see. We talk about the big 5, and I hate the big 5. There's so much more. The littlies are as important as the big guys. But it's all there on the landscape. And to see this place come back from a sterile landscape to where it is today, and it's thriving, and the birds are calling again, and they wake you up in the morning. You can't help, most of us in the Western world wake up at 6, 7 o'clock, and not in our landscape. You will wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning when the birds start calling. So, but going back to the conflict side of things, we try and avoid it at all costs there. So it's this mutual respect, and the various layers that play a very big role in us being that successful. We identified from day one that communities had to be involved. But we and a lot of you, if you know Africa, we talk about wide open expanses. I think those days are gone, and we have to fence in areas, and it's for the protection of the animals, but also the protection of the people. As soon as you get into human-wildlife conflict, you've got a serious problem on your hands, and people are trying to survive, and you've got a hippo walking into your fields, and they destroy it in one night. That's your entire year's crop that's gone, and you can imagine the unhappiness that goes with that. So we try and avoid any form of human-wildlife conflict. So we've got this fence around our reserve. It's 144 kilometers, and we maintain it religiously with 40 community members. So in total, there's 181 community members appointed in Majete. Comes directly out of the community. We're busy working on a buffer zone project now where the first 200 meters is your property, but we will pay you for the management of that property. You will manage it for us, but you'll keep away the bushfires, the fence theft, the poaching, and we'll hold you accountable. But you don't have to then farm it. We'll pay you the same as what the dividend you would have got out of farming the land. So we're trying to change the mindset into a conservation mindset. And I don't think anybody's ever got the intention to destroy. It's purely a survival mechanism. You want to survive. We've got these structures, so it starts with a very extensive community project where we provide various platforms. We've got grievance mechanisms out there. Every month we sit down as a team, we got grievance boxes all around the reserve. Most of it's about employment. Okay, we need jobs. But we very seldom get a grievance that's directly directed at us for the park being present, and it's actually causing any impact on the community. It's more wanting to be part of that family and be part of the incredible upliftment that Majete has brought along with it. But I think the communication is clear. It's really important to respect the traditional culture of the area. You cannot go into these areas not respecting the culture. And then, what's crazy about it, most probably all of you have seen, I'm not sure, but you've seen elephant or you've seen lion. There are people living outside our reserves that have never ever seen these animals. So we make this assumption that everybody's in harmony. And what's important for us is to run education trips for young kids. We on a daily basis bring in many children into the park from the local communities as well. And these are the future landowners around the reserve, and these are the ones that are going to keep Majete safe ultimately, and our park safe. So there are many tools that we use, and then we do a lot of upliftment. We've built clinics, we've built schools, I can't tell you how many water wells or boreholes we've drilled around the reserve. It's in the hundreds. People don't have to walk very far to get water. People historically would walk 5, 6, 7 kilometers with a drum on their heads and collecting 20 liters of water and walking back again. It's often the kids that have to do that. We've made sure that most villages around Majete have all got drinking water. And those are the basic needs of most people. We've catered for that. And then we've also created business around the park. We've got a honey project. We've got over 500 hives, and this coming year there's 3 parks in Malawi, Luwande and Korakora and Majete. We'll produce 24 tons of honey out of the communities, and we then distribute that honey across the landscape. We're able to sell it in Malawi at this stage, and we can't keep up with the demand, but we've recently also looked at selling it internationally. And if you want pure honey, it would be this honey. It's the finest of all honey, all organic honey. But it's one of many projects. We've got fish farms. So as much effort that goes into protecting the area also goes into taking care of the people around the reserve as well.
John, can you quantify some of these? You mentioned a number of benefits that the community have gained as a result of effective park management. Can you quantify some of that for the audience? So how big do you consider the community to be around Majete? How many schools, how many clinics, how many of these? So that gives you an idea of the scale of the work that you do.
So it might sound small, but it's pretty much 120,000 people living on our doorstep. And it doesn't take much of an imagination. If you go onto Google Earth and you look for our little reserve, Google it, you're going to find it. And what has happened is the deforestation and people encroaching right onto our boundaries. We don't have a meter buffer at this stage. You can see exactly from a satellite imagery where we are. So, lost my train of thought.
How many schools?
Okay,
clinics?
so going back to the setup of the 6 traditional authorities around Majete, each one of those then gets unpacked into villages, and we have tried over the years, over a 20-year period, that most of the villages have got schools or classrooms that are built. We've put in clinic facilities, and if we can't put them in ourselves, we form partnerships. There's a project called the Hunger Project. We've got 6 epicenters, we call them, and those epicenters consist of a creche for young kids. They've got a maize mill, they've got a library, we're busy setting them up with Wi-Fi and computer equipment, and they've got a big hall that they can get together, and some of them have got a mini hospital clinic set up with them as well. So there's 6 of these, and the intention is to expand that to 9. Again, this model duplicates itself in all the parks. You've got to remember that.
So would you say that these clinics, you're actually able to serve the 120,000 people that live around Majete? So all these communities are now taken care of from that perspective.
So it's a difficult one. Right now we're in a very good space, but population's increasing at a dramatic rate in Africa, and you heard those figures, right? So maintaining emotional ownership is going to be a big challenge in future. So upskilling and getting people to buy into the concept and taking ownership of the reserve is really important, and it's got to be driven by the communities themselves. And I think, I know it is a massive success in our part of the world where people do not want to lose the Majete. It's the one model where people now will fight tooth and nail to keep it because they see the benefits of a reserve. And it's, for every family that's employed in Majete, at least 10 other families are benefiting. And that's how the African culture works as well. It's not, you might be employed, but you're definitely benefiting 10 other members as well. So it has huge knock-on effects around the reserve.
Yeah. So in summary, since African Parks took on management of Majete, schools have been built, clinics have been built, businesses have been developed, and the whole economic upliftment of the community, which I think we refer to as conservation-led economy. So as a result of this anchor protected area, the whole area is uplifted economically as well. I wonder if you could share just a little bit of information on how exactly does effective park management work? How do you run a park? With what type of people do you need? How does that all work?
So it's quite, a lot of people think it's a very romantic lifestyle. Come comes at a cost. And to our personal lives as well, and your commitment, you don't lead 9 to 5 days, and we're often working 14, 15-hour days. My team, I keep thinking tonight, but we're 6 hours ahead of time, but they were darting lines last night at 2 o'clock in the morning, and and we do that also to keep the community safe, so we know where the lions are and the predators are, and if they do break out, we can recover them very quickly. We do that for a broad spectrum of species as well. But the park setup is quite a complex one, and you need various. We're a little empire on our own. We work in a country that's incredibly poor. You can walk out to a hardware shop and you can walk out to a pharmacy. Forget about that. We've got to order goods in, and it takes weeks to get there. It's a different mindset. You've got to think ahead. So we've got our own dedicated workshops. We do our own fleet management. We've got 18 vehicles in Majete, and that's generally it's similar to what you'd find in other parks. We've got an aircraft. I fly an aircraft myself. We've got a fleet management team that takes care of all our vehicles, motorbikes, Land Cruisers, graders, all the yellow metal that you need. We could do our own earth moving in the reserve. And then you've got an extension team, community development team. One of the most important teams. I can't stress how important it is to always keep the communities on board, but it's a particular skill set that you need in those team members, and they generally just operate outside of the reserve. And then we've got law enforcement. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, and I don't like talking about law enforcement. It's more conservation managers and what we used to call them rangers in the old days, and a lot of countries still refer to rangers. Law enforcement is not the right term. These are conservation monitors. They're people that are affectionate about the landscape, but they've got the legal mandate to make arrests within the reserve. And our interventions at an all-time minimum. We maybe have 2 a month, where people come in for subsistence reasons and they try and poach animals. They use snaring, they use gin traps, or some of you might know it as a bear trap. They use rifles, muzzle loaders. It's all the old type of muzzle loader. They make them themselves. And ranger's job, and it's a dangerous job. We lost a ranger last year to a stabbing, trying to arrest a poacher, and was stabbed to the heart. And over the years, there have been many fallen rangers that have tried to, practice their jobs and have died in the line of duty. And then tourism is a big one for us. We've got a commercial department that is critical for the long-term sustainability. So we've got our own little lodge called Tuwali. One thing that makes African parks different from any other conservation organization or lodge type system, the dollar spent in our parks stays in our parks, and it gets reinvested in the park, and it's reinvested in the communities, and it's reinvested in the management of the park. Not a single dime leaves that reserve. I won't even share with sister parks in Malawi. If you spend your money in Majete, every dime goes back to Majete, and we pride ourselves upon that as well. And maybe just mention that we incredibly, this corporate world is very much part of our genetic makeup as well. We very strict on how we spend the donor money. We've got systems in place from extensive standard operating procedures to audits to, we first unpack it with a long-term sustainability strategy. We give ourselves a 10-year plan, and then we break it down to a 5-year plan, which is a business plan, and from there we get our KPIs that are derived from that. And like any corporate world, you're being assessed every quarter, and every staff member to the most junior staff member gets assessed as well. So on a commercial side, we want to spend the money wisely. We look at various options. It's not only tourism. There's variable nature units, there's carbon credits, there's a couple of solutions to getting sustainability. At the moment in Malawi, it's difficult to attract tourists. Most people here don't even really know where Malawi is. And we need to market it. We need to get people on the landscape, come see these incredible stories. You know, I think most people have heard of the Serengeti, and you've heard of the Kruger Park, and you've heard of the Okavango Delta, but there's some incredible stories out there, and these are the little places that really need the support and need people to know they're critically important to the diversity of the African landscape.
And just to emphasize also that John just described what we refer to as a business approach to conservation. So each park in the African Parks portfolio is very much viewed as a standalone legal entity with its own board, and on this board sit our stakeholders, so it will be government, community, and African parks. And no funds or revenue generated at park level will ever leave these parks, so they don't come up. Funds don't run up to the head office, they are reinvested in the conservation area where they were generated. John, I wonder if we could just for a moment talk about mandates. How long are we mandated to manage Majete? What is the relevance and importance, rather, to being able to impact this and make this change to these areas?
I think what's been really important for African Parks and what sets us apart from most NGOs operating on the African landscape, and I think you find this all over the world, if you don't have sole mandate, you find yourself in a predicament, and like many countries in the world, corruption is part of the landscape, and you know, governments try and get their hands on the money, and we have made it very clear from the onset. If you want African parks, and we've been asked by governments to join. It's not us going to governments. I think Majete was the only one where we proposed, can we run a reserve for you? But generally after that, governments have come to us and asked us for support. So the mandate is critical. You have to have the mandate. We bring in the expertise. Mentorship is there, and it's ongoing. But I think generally that's been our success, is having the mandate to actually run the reserves and setting up a very clear plan and how to achieve that. And you can see from the exponential growth, it's been incredibly rewarding. It's an organization that's grown incredibly quickly. I don't think there's another conservation organization in Africa, at least, that has got the amount of land under conservation and the protected areas, at least. We've done it in a very, very short time, and generally we've got very loyal donors that support us, and they know that every dollar spent is well spent and it's accounted for.
And I think that's the important point, is that African Parks is invited into these countries, so we never go where we're not wanted. These mandates are given to us. How long is Majete's mandate?
So our mandate expires 2028, but then we've got an option for a 15-year extension. Okay. And already, so governments like, okay, well, we need 10% of your turnover. We need, and the community is already fighting back. We don't even have to raise our voices. It's saying it's not going to happen. You know, we need to get the park sustainable. We need to power back the money into the areas around the reserve. So, which has shown huge benefit for us. We have no doubt in our minds that we will get the 15-year extension, but generally mandates vary between 20 and 25 years for African Parks contracts.
I think on that note, I want to just summarize and thank John for his insights on this incredible story. And we wanted to share with you a video where our community members around Majete share their views on the changes and how that's impacted their lives. I was hoping there would be someone here to do this from 1880. Sorry, that's right. This one? Yeah, thanks. Any questions in the meantime?
I'm curious as to, like, can I ask?
Please.
Yeah.
Given the long history of all the countries, where did the disconnect come from? I mean, where was the disconnect when people kind of lost their connection with the land and started kind of just destroying it?
It's the economy. Hey, it's Africa generally is very, very poor continent, and you survive for today. And if you've got a tree on the landscape and you can make charcoal out of it, you're going to cut it down, and it's going to give you a source of income for a day or two.
So that must have happened at some point. I would think that historically, with maybe their religious rites and the practices, there was a much more strong communication and connection with the land. So
I think it's a numbers issue as well. The populations have grown dramatically as well. It's just it's a finite issue. So at some point you go beyond a point where you can actually sustainably survive with the piece of land you've got. And that encroachment has been exponential. It's just grown over the landscape. I've been in Majete 5 years. Honestly, if you had to see the picture I've got in my mind, it's changed dramatically. And it's just this influx of people. It's just a growing population. And there are many issues around population growth and why. But it really comes down to population numbers, and people are just trying to survive with the resources they've got. It's in a country that's incredibly impoverished. There's no business, there's no opportunities. Kids get their degrees and they pump out degrees like you can't believe, and through the universities, and they've got these massive expectations. It's just not happening, it's not there. So they end up back with their families and farming in the landscape. And one of the biggest exports in Malawi is charcoal. They've cut down the
trees
forest.
outside and inside.
Okay. You want to pay now?
Have you finished?
We can take your question after this.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Community. We are present because of the forest and visitors coming to see the animals. They collect money, they are ticket, and the money went to the community.
Before Majete came, people were able to produce enough from their fields. But this time, after being trained, people now know how to get more yield from a very small land. What they would think of getting from the reserve, they will get it from their own homes. They have birds, which give them eggs, goats that give them milk. And after selling them, they get money. And that very same money will help them to pay school fees for their own children. There are so many benefits to protecting Majete wildlife.
Some years ago, we don't have these trees, and these trees were provided by Majete to help us to sustain the environment, to recover the environment which has been lost here. Soon after Majete in 2003, I recall, come to us, is when we see that our environment is now coming back. We have a lot to do on the wildlife farm. So we teach them so that they can do well in the future and they can support them in their future.
Majete Wildlife Reserve is also doing a lot in terms of education for learners in this community. By paying school fees, they brought change in myself because I saw my dreams coming true. I went to college where I qualified as a primary school teacher. A lot of children who would not have been able to go to school due to lack of school fees are benefiting from the protection of Majete Wildlife Reserve. Majete Wildlife Reserve has no limit.
Before the opening of this facility, people could move a long distance to get medical services. They are now able to receive treatment here. We do offer cancer screening and the family planning, and then we do offer HIV testing services so people are able to know the well-being of their body. We are working, we are being happy, we are helping the community, and the community will help us as well. Thank you.
When the Aquapats come here, they try to motivate us how we can do a beekeeping farm as a business. So they give us support us with beehives. So because now we have a lot of beehives, that is why we are producing more. Majete means that, to me, it means that it's our future.
Also, but all the infrastructure has been built, like the lodges, which is bringing the equipment into the park. Having the job itself is one of the greatest things. 12 years working as a mechanic up to this stage, which I am now the supervisor of this workshop. The experience I didn't have, I got it in there.
We have different kinds of micro projects that are taking place around this protected area. People are able to generate income just because of the projects that are happening. African Banks is providing us with books. We are getting good education just because of Majete. Livelihoods. We are drinking good water around this park just because Majete provide us with boreholes. It's important to protect the environment or to protect this Majete just because we have seen a lot of fruits. Majete is something else, is a tool to the development of this generation and even the next generation.
Any questions? Happy to take some. Yes, please.
For John and you guys just celebrated 20th anniversary last year, right? And you mentioned that just in Majete alone, there are 120,000 people. So how did the population come to be? Is it just generations from when it was a desolate land? And if not, where are these people coming from? As in, and also why? If population growth is an issue at Majete, like is there anywhere you can cap it or I don't know.
So it's very difficult to talk about family planning or any of those issues because it's often frowned upon that the Western world is trying to enforce certain methods and trying to curb the African population growth that you could also realize. So the colonial history of Africa is very much fresh in the minds of people. So it's very difficult to deal with things like, population and numbers and family planning. And so, but generally the African continent numbers are expanding at a dramatic rate. It's the fastest increasing population of all continents in the world. Many reasons, and I think the biggest one is poverty and the lack of education and a lack of actual future. Kids are, this sounds really harsh, but families will have children to actually work the land. It's nothing unusual for me to see driving through a village and their little 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds busy hoeing away and working, or carrying water, or carrying firewood, or it's generally accepted that, and family, the larger the family means wealth as well in the African culture. So it's a problem that we have, and I base it on education. You would have heard a lot out of that little snippet's really great for us because it's all about educating, and we know that throughout the world, and empowering women as well. I can talk about our efforts and how we now have a ranger corps that's got women in it, and it was very much a man's world, and you wouldn't see a ranger carrying a firearm and being in military attire. But now we've got our ladies there, and they're proud, and you can see they're incredibly proud of being involved. And you can't believe how the community, the young girls, are looking up to these ladies. It's early days, but again, the problem is there, and it's across the African continent. It's a rapidly growing population, and we've got to start somewhere. And at our local scale, we believe we're making a massive difference. And we see it. It's incredibly rewarding to see people come up to you and thank you out of the blue and say, "You've given me a life, you've given me a career." And it's going to take time, but I'm an optimist at heart, and I know if we hang in there, over time you can resolve many issues. I was saying to Sue earlier about, we must forget about the past, and many countries, we've got a country, Rwanda. Some of you might have been to Rwanda. They had a genocide. They had horrific atrocities committed in the country, and they've got a dictator as a leader, but he's not all bad, and he's as far as the African continent goes, I would rate it as one of the best countries in the African continent. It is thriving. It can be done. And he's changed the whole mindset, and people are passionate, and they're loyal, and they are patriotic towards their country. I get a lot of Rwandese coming to Majete to see the model, and they're so proud of what they've achieved. So it can be turned around. Rwanda is a classic example of that. And I believe at a micro scale, we're doing exactly that in our African Parks model. We're trying to change the mindset and make a difference. We're a conservation organization, but we're not fools in believing we can work outside of the community. The community has to be part of the solution.
You answered two of my big questions already, because I was going to ask about poaching and corruption, so that's mostly covered. What I wanted to ask about, I guess, is how does political instability affect your operations, both, let's say, at the national level and at the local level? Yeah,
it is a challenge, and politicians come and go, and they have a very short shelf life, and they take as much as they can get as quickly as possible. And it's a scourge not only in Africa. I think you find that in many other countries as well. But it does affect one. But we always bring partners first, and we respect our government partners, keep them involved. But they chop and change, and it's most probably one of the most frustrating parts of my job. And that's the less romantic side of it, is seeing you've got a new Minister of Tourism, and when you look again, there's somebody else stepped in, and it can happen overnight, and you've got to rebuild those relationships. It's a reality on the landscape. But I think our reputation speaks for itself, and even the politicians realize it's a big mistake to actually challenge these guys, because they're doing really good on the landscape. It's a terrible way of referring to it, but we talk about a missionary graveyard in Africa, and a lot of NGOs come in, and they throw a lot of money, and there's no tangible evidence, there's nothing. They leave, and they often crawl out of the country and given up on trying to make a difference. African Parks, and honestly, I've only been with it for 6 years, has stood there for the long haul, and we're starting to see the dividends of that. We're starting to see the payback from the communities and trusting us, because it's about gaining trust. Politicians are a necessary evil, okay? So we deal with it, but we realize you've also got to tread very carefully, because at the end of the day, you're at their mercy, being in the country. But I think a lot of these countries realize they need all the help they can get, and that's why we get asked to come into the countries and to assist with conservation efforts. And a spin-off is our community involvement. It's actually really big.
You mentioned earlier about fencing of Majete, and I was wondering, with there's studies showing that habitat fragmentation influences or impacts biodiversity. So where do you stand, or as African Park stands, in terms of increasing natural corridors and also helping out with biodiversity, but also balancing that with human population increase?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, and it's on paper it's great to say we can have corridors, but the reality is there are millions of people in between these areas, and you don't want to compromise human rights here. So, but what we do is, it's a talk for another day, but we've got 161 protected areas that we've identified that are critical areas that need to be protected in Africa. And you heard about the 30-30 strategy. So, AP can only take on so many. I don't think there's a week that goes by that we're not being asked to take over another reserve. What's up? 130 million is our budget for the current budget for the year. That's a lot of money, and we've got to find donors to support us with that. But we all understand genetics. We all understand the connectivity. But it's not always feasible. I sit in a reserve. Right next to me is a place called Lengwe National Park. Used to be the premier reserve in Malawi. Today it's worse off than Majete was in 2003. And that's 4 kilometers away from me. And if there was political will, we would get that connectivity. But this is where the politicians and the egos come into play and changing mindsets. But we never give up. We keep asking the right questions, and hopefully in time we will there get a corridor. But we realize that it's critical to have the connectivity. We're not sure what island conservation and what those genetics, what will happen in future. I'm personally not sure that a Majete can be sustainable in its own. You get these genetic bottlenecks that take place, and it just takes one disease to come through the population, you wipe out entire species. So it's critical that we get the connectivity between these landscapes.
Who owns the land?
The government. Yeah, so we don't own any land. We lease. We have a management mandate to manage it. In fact, it's similar to a lease agreement.
So any infrastructure we put on the land, it belongs to the government. So the day we depart, it's theirs. Be it the vehicles, be it the computer, the laptop, it's theirs. But while we're there, and I must make it very clear, we're in charge. Because otherwise it would not necessarily work.
So was there normally an exit, quote unquote, exit strategy, like in view of leaving the place in 5 years' time, this is what we're here?
So for us it's critical to know, and that's why we've got a 15-year extension to this contract of ours. So we're not ready to leave, and we're not at that point where we've got it. We're looking at a 75% sustainability ratio. We're sitting at about a 26% at the moment.
Financial sustainability.
Yeah. So I think we'll leave when the time is right and when the government feels they can take over and they want to take over. We're never going to hold anybody at ransom and say when the contract's up, it's up, and if we get invited back, we'll do so. But I think in most cases we would be invited back. These governments are pretty much bankrupt. The budget for Majete is bigger than the entire conservation budget for the entire Malawi. And they've got another 9 parks they've got to run on their own. So, they're falling to pieces. It's an absolute mess out there. And I think you're going to see this model duplicate itself in time. Not necessarily just African parks, there might be other organizations. There's Peace Parks, there's FZS, there's a couple of organizations. They've got a slightly different model. We're the only one that says, if we come in, we take over and we run it according to our business model.
Is there any kind of information from or knowledge from the community that kind of fertilizes kind of the actions that you guys take? Because I'm curious, again, going back to the thing of maybe there are these kind of traditional knowledge or about the landscape or about the balance between.
Definitely. So we got a group called the Majete Wildlife Reserve Association, and each park would have a different one. And then and you don't have to have any academic background. I sit in a boardroom that's got over 100 people that come and attend, and we sit for hours. We love to meet. So, and we discuss solutions and the way forward, and a lot of them actually is very valid, input, and that does help us in our decision making. And I think that's what the success is. It's an open book. It's not, we're not keeping anything away from the community. When we make decisions, we approve our business plans. Like right now, it's actually happening tomorrow. We've just done our business plan for 2025. It's being presented to the community tomorrow. So yeah,
What's the board makeup like?
Our board?
Yeah.
So our board has got a government official, it's got a community member on board, and then it's got various high-profile businessmen from across Malawi on the board. But there is representation from the community and representation from government, and then generally businessmen that understand the landscape.
From your 75% financial sustainability, how much of that is made up by tourism in your plan?
Yeah, so that's the objective. We're at far less. We're going to hopefully hit the 27 mark this year, and that 27% is tourism, and we're looking at various credits. There's a new one on the landscape, variable nature units, which you get paid for your services, protecting various species, and AP is pretty much launching that as an organization. Carbon credits are out there, but unfortunately governments have realized carbon credits can also top up their kitties, so they're laying claim to the carbon credits. So we're not going to fight that battle too much longer, but we've come up with this option of variable nature units, and that's an option we're pursuing now, and it's getting quite a bit of traction. There are various options, and I think the sale of carbon, the sale of nature units, and combined with tourism is the way to go to get it sustainable. Malawi is, right now, it sounds terrible, but it's a humanitarian aid worker society that supports us. So on weekends I meet doctors from all over the world, I meet nurses from all over the world, but we haven't really captured the tourism market, and it's an incredible country. It's got Ramsar sites, it's got a lake that's got the highest diversity of freshwater fish species. If you go to any aquarium, I can bet your bottom dollar that fish is from Malawi. There are 800 species of cichlids from the lake alone, but it's not marketed, and the country's not doing itself any justice. So we're involved in that level as well. We're trying to change the marketing landscape and try and create a package where people would want to visit Malawi. And that's going to be really critically important. You would rather go to the Serengeti or go to Botswana if you want to see the big five. But if I can attract you to a country that is the warm heart of Africa, the people are incredible. They are the nicest people you'll ever come across. They're the friendliest people I've come across on the African continent. But they've also got this incredible gem of a landscape, but it's not promoted and marketed properly.
I just wanted to add one more thought when you talked about the interconnectedness of landscapes. So the most recent parks, and John, please correct me if I'm going wrong anyway, that we took on management of is in South Sudan, Bamandadingilo National Park. And the space is completely wild. No one really knew what was going on, what there was. It's so wild, not even the terrorists want to go there. So what we discovered in the 2 years that we're managing this landscape, we collared as many animals as we could to understand their movements, to understand the numbers, flew reconnaissance flights every day, did the analysis on the photographs, and what we discovered was, in fact, and we announced this with the government of South Sudan, it's the largest mammal migration happening in that landscape. It's not the wildebeest in the Serengeti, it's happening in South Sudan, and it's 3 times the size of the migration happening in the Serengeti. And that just goes to show there are such wild places left on this planet. It's quite amazing. Any other questions? I think on that note, we'll end the talk. Thank you very much for attending this evening and for your questions. It was lovely to meet most of you as well. Please feel free to take the brochure. There's more information on the organization and also my contact details should you wish to get in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Actually, I have one question. Sorry.
Oh, it's too late.
The two ladies were talking about the population and where did they come from, etc. And I just wonder whether having not perhaps been to that part of the world, you could just quickly explain to us what the lifestyle, I mean, what are the occupations that people have there? How many, are they nomadic? Are they farmers inherently in that area of Majete? Why are they all turning up to the borders? Obviously because there's work there and income opportunities. But what does the surrounding area of Majete look like in terms of occupation?
So historically, everybody occurred around the lake, and if you look at, some of you would have heard of David Livingstone. He was one of the early explorers across the African continent, a missionary, and he records only finding people along the lakeshore. So with time, and they pastoralists, they nomadic to a certain extent, moving across the landscape, but within a confined area. But because of space, it being so critical now that there's no more spacing to move into. Every inch of land, I can't tell you how populated Malawi is. I'll give you a funny story. A cheetah breaks out, and we in a helicopter, and I dart the cheetah, and the pilot says to me, "Are you sure we can land here?" Because we're always worried about rotor contact and things like that, and is it safe for the helicopter and the people? Because people come flooding in, they don't realize the risk of the helicopter, and there's not a soul in sight. We think we're in a pristine area. And cheetah goes down beautifully, and I said to Brad, the pilot, said, "Okay, well, you can shut down. You should be fine." I can't tell you what happened that day. It was thousands of people within a very short period of time just came over the ridges from all over the place. The people are everywhere. Every square inch of Malawi has got people now, and it's at that point where it's at a breaking point. Something's going to give. And we can only manage what we've got around our reserves, but the same issue repeats itself across the African continent. If you go onto satellite firms, it's called firms, FIRMS. It's a NASA site that gives you the heat imprint of fires on the landscape. You'll be shocked to see what's happening in Central Africa and how just by fires alone, you can determine people's impacts on the charcoal ovens, because when you pack charcoal, you cut a tree down, you cut it up in small pieces, you then cover it with clay, and you produce your charcoal. But that heat imprint shows up on the satellite imagery. It's everywhere. But to your point, it's just the population's expanded over time, and now you don't move off your piece of land. You go. The village headman is the guy. Okay, it starts the traditional authority. There's a paramount chief as well. I've left him out of the equation. Paramount chiefs, the traditional authority. Then you get your senior village headman, your village headman. But from your village headman, you can buy a parcel of land, and pretty much all those parcels are gone. And a parcel of land can be 4 times the size of this room. And that's it. You've got to make a livelihood out of that.
So they're not really nomadic pastoralists anymore. I mean, they can't.
Not at all. And I think that's a colonial thing. We cut up the African continent into countries, and it's something. We can go back and look at history. Why we're sitting with some of these problems? They definitely derive from some of these issues. But it is what it is. We spoke about it. We've got to think into the future, and we've got to find solutions. There's no point dwelling on the past, and countries that dwell on the past never ever strive and go forward. So, but Malawi, I think we are that little pebble in the water, where you create a little ripple and it becomes a wave, and we like there's a ministry portfolio committee arriving this week in Majete to come and look at how a successful model can be run, or a business can be run in Malawi, because generally people are failing on the landscape. But we've shown at a very localized scale, you can make a very big difference, and communities can benefit. That's not, you know, those are very, all those folk are very well known to me, and they true supporters of what we've done in the Majete over the years. This is not a marketing attempt on our behalf and told them to script what they had to say. It's the true feeling of what's going on around the reserve. People are incredibly passionate, and it's provided a sense of hope. There's something for them at the end of the day.
And Majete is 144 square kilometers, is that right?
No, it's 144 kilometers around the park, so it's 720 square kilometers.
Oh, okay. It's one big.
Yeah, 720. Yeah, it's not that big, but it's, look, it takes, you definitely, those of you, and I hope one or two of you will come, you know, that's the ripple effect, and come and visit us, and it's the most amazing place, and it takes 6-7 hours to drive around the reserve, and it's wild, it's proper Africa, hey, it's the old Africa that people read about. It's a crazy place. We've got some of the highest lion densities anywhere in Africa. If you don't see lion, there's something wrong. You've got elephant on the landscape, you've got rhinos, you've got these little guys called pangolins, which are some of the most trafficked animals in the world. They occur in great numbers in the reserve now. But it's a very, very special story, and the community forms part of that.
And are you lucky enough to have some indigenous trees, pockets of indigenous trees?
Yeah, everything's indigenous. That's
as in old and not like old parts of the landscape.
Yeah, so our famous tree is the baobab. Have you heard of the big baobab? And we've got 1,000-year-old baobabs on the landscape. These are...
So they're still there.
You stand there in awe of these trees, the most amazing trees. You've got mahoganies that are 800-900-year-old mahoganies. The trees that were felled were the hardwoods, the leadwoods, and they were exported out of the country. But not only on the periphery. Inside of the park, it's intact and pristine. And that was our success. The park hadn't been that damaged. So if you've got your vegetation base in place still, then you're in a good space. You can always bring the animals back, but you can never bring back the vegetation. You can, but it's not going to be what it historically was.
Interesting. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
It was really interesting, informative.
Thank you.